Hello, Barry Edelstein. How are you today?
Okay, thanks for asking. And under the circumstance, got to find a question, then or you, because really, this question, I don't really know how to answer it really, but I'm doing, okay. I got a roof over my head, and I got food in my belly, and I got healthy wife and kids, and so things are all right.
Yeah.
How about you?
Similar. Life is pretty, different, but good. I So you are the artistic director of the Old Globe, but before that, you were a Rhodes Scholar and you directed New York Shakespeare Festival at the Public and directed actors like Uma Thurman and Jeffrey Wright and David Strathairn, and now you're here talking to me.
Yeah, pretty great. No, it's been a wonderful ride. Never anticipated that it would have this chapter in it, but
Yeah.
which of us did?
So how did you find your way into theater? What's your career journey been?
Well, I grew up in the suburbs of New York City in Bergen County. And at the time I was a kid, so I was in school in, the high school in the mid 70s, late 1970s. There was a really robust public school arts program in the town I was in. And it was close to New York. So the people who taught theater were New York theater people with careers, and their day job was that they taught high school in the suburbs.
Hmm.
So there's a really good theater program in junior high and in high school, and I got the bug as a kid and just loved it, and stayed with it. Like everybody, you want to be an actor. That's how everybody gets the bug at first, is you start out in an act. And then I went to college. I went to Tufts, and I continued to act there. And I had a really wonderful guy named Vincent Murphy, who's now at Emory in Atlanta. And he said, you should think about directing. Because I was one of those actors who always stuck his nose into everybody else's business, wanted to know what was going on in that scene and what was going on in this scene and why the designer was doing this and that. And an actor doesn't do that. A really great actor is like, here's my thing and I'm doing my thing and that's it. And whatever the production is around me, I'm just going to pursue what my character wants in the story. But I couldn't do that. I wanted to know what else was going on. So this guy said, you should think about directing. And so I started taking some directing classes, and then that's it. Never looked back. So that's what I wanted to do. And I've been doing it ever since. A long time now, 30 something years professionally, 30, yeah, about 30 years life before that. So kind of crazy. Did I freeze again?
You froze for a second, but I heard all of that.
I'm so sorry.
You're totally okay.
Yeah, we just installed fiber optic internet in the house specifically to avoid that. But
Hmm.
I don't know. Got to figure that out. I'm going to call the tech guy and say, what can I do to make this a little more robust? Anyway, sorry.
Now you're back. Um, so then, how did you find your way at how did you go to the public theater?
So after I graduated from Tufts, I got a scholarship to go to Oxford, and I spent 2 years at Oxford, and then I spent a year in London just banging around and going to see theater, traveling in Europe, doing a bunch of nothing. And a woman named Elizabeth Kirkland, who now is not in the theater anymore, but she was working for Joseph Papp at the New York Shakespeare Festival, and she had been a Rhodes Scholar. And she was working with him. She was basically ghostwriting books that he was writing as he neared the end of his life. Joseph Papp was the founder of the New York Shakespeare Festival, the great American Shakespeare impresario, maybe of all time, certainly of the 20th century. He created Shakespeare in the Park in New York. He was a pioneer of non-traditional casting, discoverer of enormous numbers of careers. He discovered Meryl Streep and James Earl Jones and Raul Julia and, you know, uh, you name it, Martin Sheen. I mean, the list of people that came up, Kevin Kline, the list of people that came up through there is amazing. By the time I graduated college, he was elderly and nearing the end of his life. And Betsy Kirkland said, "I'm leaving the public." She was a Rhodes Scholar too. I left that out. She said, "I'm leaving the public, and looking for somebody to take over the kind of Shakespeare job, helping dramaturg and support the Shakespeare production." So I went and met Joe Papp. Crazy experience in my life. I was 23, maybe, right out of school and hanging out with the legendary Joe Papp at the Public Theater in New York. And he hired me for $250 a week. And I worked on the Shakespeare plays. He had just announced that he was going to do all 36 of Shakespeare's plays in 6 years as his swan song. It was called the Shakespeare Marathon. They made it through maybe half when he died. He died in 93. And then his successors, Joanne Akalaitis at first, and then George Wolfe finished the Shakespeare Marathon. So I was hired to support the productions. They never did 6 a year. It was supposed to be 6 a year for 6 years. They never did that. But he wrote books. There was a complete works of Shakespeare that was branded with the Public Theater logo. They were going to put them on TV. They put maybe 3 of them on TV. And that was my start. And I met Raul Julia. I met these incredible directors. I met the leading designers in the American theater. I met Kevin Kline and assisted him when he directed himself as Hamlet. We're still very close friends to this day. It was drama school, because I never went to drama school. At Oxford, I studied English literature, never really studied theater. So that period of 4 or 5 years at the Public at the end of Joe Papp's life and then shortly thereafter was really my training. And that's what sort of got me into it. It was a total dream come true to learn about American Shakespeare at the great American Shakespeare Theater and hang out with all these brilliant actors and watch how they did what they did. It was great.
Wow. My mentor was Gerald Friedman, who worked.
Of course, was there. Yeah. Oh, he just passed away, right? Not too long ago.
Last year. Yeah.
Yeah. Too bad. Yeah, I met him a couple of times. Sure, he was hugely important at the Public Theater for a long time. And I think one of many kind of children of Joe Papp who had really complicated relationships with their father figure, with their substitute father figure. He left a trail of broken hearts, in particular men who were kind of surrogate sons to him that he then had fallings out with, who most before Papp died ended up having reconciliations. Just a few days ago, Bernie Gersten died, who was one of the greatest ever producers in the American theater and was Joe's right-hand man during the great glory days of the New York Shakespeare Festival, the chorus line and stuff like that. They had a terrible falling out that lasted like 30 years. And then at the end of Papp's life, they had a reconciliation. So really complicated, extraordinary figure. But Jerry Friedman's great. How great that you got to be around him.
Yeah, I think similarly he has, like you said, I think they had a rocky relationship, but then towards the end they really made amends, and he spoke nothing but beautiful things about Joe in the end.
Yeah.
So how did you make it to San Diego?
Well, now you're skipping ahead quite a few years. So I was at the Public in that first phase in the early 90s. And the other big major mentor in my life was Michael Kahn, who was one of the great American Shakespeareans, the American Shakespeare Festival in Stratford, Connecticut. Then he was the founder of the Shakespeare Theater in Washington, D.C. And he took over the Juilliard School, where he had been teaching acting for a long time. And he needed a Shakespeare teacher. So he hired me to come and teach Shakespearean text. And I was barely older than the students that were in training at the time, but I was teaching Shakespearean acting at the Juilliard School and starting up a freelance directing career, directing plays at Juilliard and the other drama schools. In the summertime, I'd go to some Shakespeare Festival somewhere. I spent a bunch of seasons at the Idaho Shakespeare Festival in Boise. And eventually I built a directing career that brought me to the Williamstown Theater Festival in Massachusetts, where I did a production of All My Sons, Arthur Miller's All My Sons, for Mike Ritchie, who's now the artistic director of CTG in LA, and another dear friend. I was just talking to him yesterday about this calamity that we're all trying to make our way through, right? Anyway, so he hired me to do All My Sons, and it was it was 97, the 50th anniversary of the writing of the play. And it went extremely well. And it got a great review in the New York Times. And so the Roundabout brought it into New York. And that really put me on the map. That was my first big show. I had done a Shakespeare at the Public that was incredibly divisive. Half the critics in New York thought it was brilliant. The other half of the critics in New York murdered me. My first time out of the gate as a young kid, it was just horrendous. But All My Sons happened a couple of years later and put me on the map again. And that's when people started saying, hey, you should run a theater. So shortly, in the late 90s, I was asked if I wanted to run Classic Stage Company in New York, which I did it's an off-Broadway theater in Union Square in New York, one of the really wonderful, tiny off-Broadway theaters, 180 seats. It's in a beautiful space. It's an old Civil War era livery stable, one of the beautiful old wood beamed buildings in New York. It's a special, special place. And I spent 5 years as artistic director there and then was exhausted. Met my wife, we got married, she was an actor at the time, and we moved to LA, where she was working on her acting career and I was just taking a break from, running a 6-person off-Broadway operation and just, buckling under the strain of it all. And I was in LA for about 5 years when Oscar Eustis took over the Public Theater, and he said, I need a Shakespeare guy, come back. And that brought me back to the Public for my second stint at the Public. And after 5 years there, my predecessor at the Globe stepped down, and the search firm called me up and said, any interest in this? And I was like, wow, yeah, that would be amazing. As in my view, they're two great outdoor Shakespeare stages in America. One is the Delacorte in Central Park, and the other is the festival stage in Balboa Park. I was like, yeah, I want to do that. And so it was about a 9 or 10 month process of trips to San Diego to interview with the board, and I wrote this epic 12-page statement about what I would do here, and all that stuff happened. Took a long, long time, and then in 2012, the Globe offered me the job, and I've been here ever since. So, what I like to tell young people when they ask me about the theater is that the verb to career means to bang around randomly, right? We all think that we were supposed to have these careers that go straight, but that ain't what the word career is all about. You're like a pinball banging around here. My incredible good fortune is that I've bounced into giants like Joe Papp and George Wolfe and Michael Kahn and Oscar Eustis, and not to mention all the incredible actors that I've had the chance to work for, and writers like Arthur Miller. And so it's been fun, but it's been anything but a straight line. And I never would have imagined that I'd be in charge of the Old Globe and have that privilege, but thankfully it's all kind of led me here, and it's been great.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I've been in San Diego 3 or 4 years, and I've been very, very impressed with your work, especially being able to have a place to go see Shakespeare.
Oh, thanks. That's such a special place. It's murder to me what's going on at the moment, because like, oh my God, this incredible, glorious place. And it's just taking such a beating. It's just rotten.
Michael Kahn, I assisted Michael Kahn as well, and he was a dear friend of mine. And I had a moment, I'm sure that you've had this moment, where a parental figure, mentor of yours, comes to see your work for the first time. And Michael showed up at Cygnet at a show of mine. And when he was in the lobby, I was just like flabbergasted. And I was nervous, but afterwards it was just like, it was beautiful to move from him being my mentor to a peer. It was a really beautiful.
That's so great. What would that have been when he was here directing the Metromaniacs?
For Metromaniacs,
yeah.
Which
My
was an
God,
amazing production, I thought.
it was a fantastic production. Yeah, I mean, one of the true joys of my job at the Globe is I get to invite some of those folks to come. To get to invite Michael Kahn out here to come and direct. My God, I've been able to invite Molly Smith, who's another great peer and friend, and Dan Sullivan was meant to be here this summer, and we're still holding out hope that maybe, but I don't know. That seems to be receding by the day. And I get to call my friends up, even Bill Irwin. We're working on this crazy
I just read about that
show. Yeah, so that's the great joy of a job like this, is you get to call artists you really admire, and many of whom are friends that you've known for years, and say, please come out and play with us. It's great. It's a joy.
So what is Bill Irwin's Zoom play? What is it going to be like?
Well, here's what happened is that this thing happened, and the first month of this thing was just the house is on fire. Let's just put out the fire and figure out. And then about a month in, I started asking myself, okay, what are we supposed to do? And I realized there were a few things going on. One, I got to save this institution, preserve this institution, make sure it can reopen. Related to that, part and parcel of that, is I got to take care of our people. And me and Tim Shields and the staff at the Globe, we've been just turning over every leaf we can find to go, what's a solution that we can keep our people working. Then I thought, okay, I've also got to reinvent this 2,000-year-old art form for this weird crisis period. And I thought that's too much, like that's like, I'll work on keeping the place open. I'll work on taking care of our people, but somebody else can reinvent this art form, please. And we're looking at all these digital things. And I thought, I don't know what any of this is. Is it right? Is it any good? So I thought, I have an idea. I know all these geniuses. My path through this business has brought me in touch with tremendous geniuses. I'm going to call them. So I called Bill and I said, Bill, what should I do? What should we do? I don't know. I'm going to work on the institution. I'm going to work on trying to keep my people working. But what should art be at this moment? And he said, I've been thinking about this thing. We're living in Zoom. We're trying to make contact with each other, but it's impossible. Where do I look? Like right now, I'm looking at you, but you can't see me. I'm looking now into the lens, but I'm not really looking at you. What is it? How do we? And that's what he's been thinking about. So he's written this piece. It's short, it's 10 or 12 minutes. That's about a couple of actors who've been asked to do a reading on Zoom as a fundraiser for some theater company. And they're both struggling with what it means to be actors, to be people trying to communicate across this gulf. And it's, of course, hilarious because he's the greatest clown in America. And Chris Fitzgerald is this, 3-time Tony-winning comic, brilliant actor. So it's this really, really funny take on exactly what we're doing now and what it means to be living our lives attempting virtually to make contact with people. And it's just a hoot.
Yeah. Wow. I look forward to that.
Yeah, it's fun.
He's one of the best performers I've been able to see live.
He's the greatest. And the other thing I love about it is that, one of his classic routines back in the 80s, maybe even, I guess the 80s, was he would have this TV set. And this was when TV sets were big boxes, not flat screens like we have now. And he'd be on the TV, footage of himself on the TV. And then he live would be next to the TV and they'd interact. So he would like somehow step into the TV and then step out of the TV. Later, he did a version of it on an iPad. Later, he did a version of it on a huge projection screen. And so this work now of what am I if I'm stuck in Zoom seems a real extension of this exploration that he's been doing since the 1980s. He's just such a great guy. We've known each other a long time. We've had all kinds of adventures together, both in the theater and out. And he's the sweetest, most wonderful guy. And he's done this thing that's funny. And we had a rehearsal this morning, and just to laugh is such a treat. Not much is making us laugh right now. So it's a gift to be able to do it.
How do you think that theater will shift when we come back to it?
God, I don't know. I mean, it's so interesting to listen to all the different perspectives about it. I generally spend most of my time when I'm talking about why this art form matters, trying not to talk about what we call the extrinsic impacts of it, right? Economic, Globe's a $30 million institution. We make a $47 million impact on the city, whatever. This many hotel rooms that we sell, and this many vendors that we support, and this many jobs that we create, and this many restaurant meals that we sell. And I have been very uppity about that for my entire career and said, I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about emotion, and I want to talk about civilization, and I want to talk about humanity, and I want to talk about citizenship, and I want to talk about community and the magic that theater makes when people come together. And guess what? We can't make it now, right? So all I'm doing is talking about jobs, mostly to government people and elected representatives who are going to be controlling the relief funds, because we furloughed an enormous number of people. Horrible. The Globe hires a lot of people. Yeah. So my first priority now is to keep everybody working, and every time we put a 5-minute snippet of video up, that's work for the artistic department, for the marketing department, for the press department, for the graphics design department, for the finance department. That's an opportunity for the philanthropy department. And I'm like, look, future historians may judge that the work that we've put out in this period hasn't been the greatest art in the world, but it's kept people working. And that's really been my focus. And we hit the jackpot sometimes. Bill's piece will be a wonderful piece of art. Not everything is, but I've just got to keep the lights on and keep people going. What theater is going to be afterward? You know, I honestly think that it may not be 6 months from now, it may not be 9 months from now, but you know, a year or 18 months from now, it's going to be what it was for 2,500 years. One of the things that I don't like in this moment is people using the word unprecedented to describe the situation we're in, because it's not unprecedented. There have been pandemics before, and there was one only 100 years ago, and the theaters were shut down, and then they reopened and people came. You know, Shakespeare had it 4 or 5 times during his career. Pandemics came, the theaters were shut down, they reopened, people came. SARS in 19 whatever it was, 90 whatever. In Hong Kong, they shut the theaters down. The virus went away, the theaters reopened. So I think the theater is going to reopen and people are going to gather and we're going to do what we've done for 2,500 years. Maybe that we don't have the money to do it quite at the level that we were doing it in February of 2020, at least not for a little while. So I'm not worried that this 2,000-year-old art form is going to suddenly disappear. It's not. I think where the changes are going to come are going to be about the systems that are in place to support all of this. The crisis has revealed the vulnerability of these institutions, their reliance on high-priced tickets, their reliance on philanthropy in a deep way, the vulnerability of our staffs, how quickly they get impacted in terms of healthcare and stuff like that. So the broader societal debates that we're having about universal health care, about, you know, adequate food and ways to take care of our children when we go to work, the theater institutions are going to reflect all those things. And the institutional life of the Old Globe, I think, is going to change as we, along with every other institution in America, start to respond to the absolute flaws and potholes that have been revealed by this thing. Other than that, you know, I don't know, maybe there'll be some more comedy in the near term, but I don't think even that's true. I think people will want to see stories about human beings going through emotional experiences that aren't necessarily uplifting and upbeat. But you know, I don't know. I mean, I think a couple of other things that occur to us at the Globe is that this digital stuff's going to stay with us. Our arts engagement department is doing amazing stuff, pivoting content over to these digital platforms, and we're reaching thousands of more people than we can physically. We're going to keep doing it. I think videotaping shows and making options for people to watch it in their home is going to continue for a long while. We have people even before the pandemic who, for whatever reason, lack of mobility, lack of transportation, lack of adequate funds, just can't come and say to us, "Gosh, I used to love coming and I can't come anymore for reason X, Y, or Z." Well, we're going to now realize, hey, we can disseminate this content to you at the same time as we're doing it live. I think all that's true. And I guess the final thing that occurs to me is that, you know, the Globe was in the middle of a big strategic rollout of a platform that we call Theater as a Public Good, where we talked about the quality of life impact that these nonprofit institutions make in their cities. Partly jobs, partly the economic stuff that I said I don't love talking about. That's part of Theater as a Public Good, but partly it's about creating community. It's about combating social isolation and loneliness. It's about enfranchising disenfranchised communities. It's about providing a gathering place in the middle of beautiful Balboa Park. That stuff, I think, is going to become much more front and center. And I think every theater institution in the country is going to start putting communitarian kind of impulses, civic impulses, front and center, right alongside their artistic programming in a way that up until now had been sort of siloed off over here. The Globe, I think, was ahead of the curve in putting arts engagement front and center in our organization. And I really think that's going to continue. But history tells us people are going to put on plays, people are going to come, people are going to sit. I would hate to be, here's one thing I do know, I would hate to be the guy who coughs the
Yeah.
first week that the theater is back, you know?
Wow.
It's going to
Yeah.
be like, you know, that plaza you see behind me is going to have some pikes with people's heads on them, you know? Here coughed John Smith, you know? And then the entire like audience came and just tore him to shreds.
Yeah.
But by 2022, it's going to be what we all loved. You know, just pray that we're going to make it that far.
Yeah. What a salvo. That was beautiful.
That was
Thank
a
you.
long rant.
I
I'm
love
sorry
it.
about that. It's a
No,
big,
no,
long
talking
rant.
about theater as a citizenry and what it means for a community, I think is beautiful. So let's talk about, what's beautiful about what you're talking about, Barry, is that I really get a sense that you put your ego into your theater company. But what about you as an artist? Can you talk a little bit about like something that you've been proud of, maybe that you've directed recently, or something that you've problem solved and you're really happy about?
Yeah. I mean, I just had my 10th show at the Globe in the 7 years that I've been there. The last one I did was Romeo and Juliet. It was my 10th show, and it was great to go back and reminisce about that work. You know, the joy of going to working at a theater company where the answers never no, where the technical staff, the production staff, is so tremendously accomplished and can do anything. You know, I did a musical a couple of years ago called Rain by Michael John LaChiusa, and we had a 3-story house that revolved and broke apart and reconfigured itself. Like, wow, I couldn't believe that anybody could do it, let alone me, you know? So to do the work and be supported by all these folks has been special, and has given me as a director a sense of confidence that, you know, there's really no problem that ultimately I couldn't figure out how to solve with the right group of talented people around me. And I'm excited. I'm excited for the next chapter. You know, I'm 55, and I really figure I'm coming into now the sort of great, powerful chapter of my life as an artist who makes work. And I'm really looking forward to that. Here in San Diego, I'm going to be doing a show in New York, assuming that New York is open for business. It's supposed to be January of 2021. We'll see whether that happens.
Mm.
So yeah, I'm just feeling hungry and excited to try new forms and to try new projects. I've been writing a lot, which has been great. I wrote a 10-minute play for the Play at Home project, which is this wonderful thing that this consortium of theaters got together and commissioned 10-minute plays that are unproducible, but are to be read in people's homes while they're in isolation. And by now they have almost 100 plays up, you know, the Public and Woolly Mammoth and Baltimore Center Stage and St. Louis Rep and the Globe and ACT and all these wonderful theaters all over the country. And I thought, I'm going to write one. My first play all these years in this business, and I'd never written a play before. So I wrote a 10-minute play, and I've been busy working on the Shakespeares that I know are coming at the Globe, and writing copious emails and letters and statements of what's going on in the field. So I don't know. I have actually found this period creatively very productive, to my surprise. I'm having a hard time reading. That's really odd and interesting. Having a hard time doing any serious reading, doing an enormous amount of internet reading about the coronavirus and the government and, you know, all of that. But I've had a tough time picking up a novel or picking up a work of nonfiction, and actually weirdly picking up a play and trying to stay with it. I don't know why that is. I'm hoping that will just be a temporary thing. But I've been feeling very productive, and it's been a surprising and welcome byproduct of this isolation.
Are you homeschooling your kids?
Yep. Yep. Yeah, my daughter, who's in 7th grade, is pretty self-sufficient, although we check in a lot, and we, you know, check in on how she's doing and make sure that it's going okay and help out with homework and projects and studying here and there. But my son, who's 7 and in 1st grade, I've been spending 2.5 hours with him every single morning, going through the program that the teachers send. And it's been great. This morning was actives, was spectacular. Really enjoyed on adjectives. You know, we did last week, did a coins, you know, Here's a puzzle for you. Try and explain to a 7-year-old why the coin worth 5 cents is bigger than the coin that's worth 10. That was really, really complicated. Also try explaining to a 10-year-old why American coins don't have the number that they're worth printed on them. It's really, really like, hey, can you put 25 on that quarter? How hard would that be? Really weird. So yes, homeschooling. We've been having fun. Been great. Did I freeze again?
You froze for a second, yeah.
Okay.
The audio stayed with us.
Good.
Do you all your years working on Shakespeare, do you have a Shakespeare? Do you have a favorite? Is that a difficult answer?
Yeah. Generally the answer, as you know, is whichever one I'm working on at the time.
Yeah.
But truly, no, the one I love is Winter's Tale. I've directed it. I suspect I'll do it again at some point in my life. I just love it. It's a good one for right now because it reminds us that no matter what we lose, we get a second chance somehow. No matter what mistakes we make, Providence gives us a second chance, and that's so. It's the one I find the most beautiful and the most emotionally engaging, and I love it. And first one was David Strathairn as Leontes. One was the first show that I directed at the Globe, and I'll do it a third time if someone will have me at some point. I love it very much.
Wow. Do you have anything for show and tell?
I do. You asked me to prepare something for show and tell, so I'm going to show you what I have. So this, that is going to show up in my crazy book. Shoot, I'm. There you go.
There, I can see it.
So this is a complete works of Shakespeare from 1807, which is a facsimile copy of the first folio of 1623. So the first folio of 1623, right? I don't know if you can see it. Sorry that the thing is having such a hard time seeing it. There you go. That's good. Okay, so 1623 was the first complete works of Shakespeare, 7 years after Shakespeare's death. Half of his plays had been printed in his lifetime. The other half had not been. And 2 actors in Shakespeare's theater company gathered up all 36 of the plays and printed them in 1623. And if it weren't for that volume, half of Shakespeare would not have survived. Julius Caesar, As You Like It, Twelfth Night, Winter's Tale, all the plays that only appear in that first folio volume of 1623, we wouldn't have had. So it's a major, major contribution to the world. So there were only about 700 copies, 800 copies printed at the time, because it's nearly 1,000 pages. And in the theater printing technology of the period, you're literally taking every letter on a little piece of wood and laying it out like a Gutenberg press. You lay out these letters, you spread ink, you press a page on it, then you take the letters up and you lay out the next page. So it's incredibly labor intensive. It took them about 3 years to pull the whole thing together and a long, long time to print. It's 950 pages, something like that, right? So there's only about 750 copies. And if you find one today, only about 200 of them survive. 83 of them are at the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C. And one was actually at auction at Sotheby's right before the pandemic broke out and fetched like $6.5 million. They're very, very rare. So in the sort of 18th century, as the 1700s went on, Shakespeare got famous really for the first time. In the years immediately after his death, he kind of disappeared a little bit. And then he became known again and his plays started being produced. But by the time you got to the middle of the 18th century, he was the big deal that he is now. And people wanted to read his plays and they wanted copies of the first folio, but they didn't survive. And if you could find one, they were very, very expensive. So an enterprising publisher in 1807 said, I'm going to make a copy of the first folio, the first time that ever happened. right? That actually copy it. There were other complete works of Shakespeare that subsequent editors put together as kind of modern volumes in whatever year that was. So there was a famous one in 1790. It was just a complete works of Shakespeare, just like you'd buy at the store today. But people wanted the folio. So this guy in London said, I'm just going to make a copy of the folio and people can buy it. And it'll be like a facsimile version. I'm not going to pretend it's the real one, but you can actually buy one and you'll have the experience that people had in 1623, and that's this. So when I was running Classic Stage Company in New York, when I left after 5 years, the board decided to give me a gift, and they presented me this rare book, which is a complete works of Shakespeare that looks and feels and has the same heft and the same paper and the same print as the first folio of 1623, even though it comes from almost 200 years after that. And it's
Wow.
very, very rare and very delicate, and I'm sure very expensive, although I don't know exactly. And I sort of keep it around, and that's my show and tell.
That's special. Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Do you want to leave us with anything? Words of wisdom?
Oh man, yeah, every day is so different as we go through this thing, and I'm so cognizant of the devastation to every corner of our society, But my particular corner of it is the theater, and as I talk to my colleagues around the country, the stories of loss and doom and cancellation and grief are immense. So I do find some solace in the fact that Shakespeare got there before us. Shakespeare lived through it. Shakespeare made productive use of the time that he was squirreled away, ducking the plague. And when they reopened those theaters, people looked back. We know that's what happened then, and that's what happened. That's what's going to happen here, So it's like the line at the end of King Lear: "The worst is not so long as we can say this is the worst. We're alive. We're able to actually talk. We're able to actually think. So it's not that horrible, and we're going to make it, and we're going to rebuild, and it's going to come back, and we'll be there to provide a gathering place, to make community, and to tell stories, and to make people laugh, and to cry, and I know that. I just know that in my bones, and that's what keeps me getting up in the morning and sitting back to face Zoom for hours.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing your shows and seeing you again at the theater.
Yeah, seeing you in person, which would be nice. Very nice of you to have me. Thanks.
Thank you, Barry.
Yeah,
Have a
take
lovely
care.
day in South Park.
Thanks, you too.